Chapter 4. The Spiritual Side of Life. When we examine our mode of living, we shall find that we dwell upon the spiritual side of life only upon rare and occasional intervals, while most of the time we permit consciousness to come out into the personality and sometimes remain for days, weeks, or months upon the personal side of existence. We find that during this period, soul activity becomes passive, and in consequence that personality does not have the benefit of that greater spiritual power which is necessary in order that we may meet and overcome every problem and condition in life. This being true, it is most important that we learn to live more and more upon the spiritual side of consciousness, so that we may gain possession of a larger measure of this higher power, which alone can give emancipation to the personality and higher wisdom to mind and intellect. We realize that we are not here to drift with the stream, or to fold our arms passively and say that we will let the best come to pass. The truth is that there is be anything we want, we must work for it. If we wish to make the life ideal, we must make it so ourselves. These things do not come to us simply through mere passivity or expectation. We know that we are living in an imperfect world, a world which is in the process of growth. Therefore, we necessarily meet undeveloped conditions on every side. And if we remain in a passive condition, or simply drift with the stream, many of those undeveloped conditions will come into our world, and not only disturb the order of our personal existence, but produce a great many adverse conditions, both within ourselves and in our environment. For this reason, we must make ourselves stronger than all those conditions. That is, we must rise above adversity both in wisdom and in power, and this is made possible only through the continuous expression of the soul. To this end, we must permit the spiritual side of life to have full and continuous expression, both in mind and in body. And we shall find, under these circumstances, that we will continue to have the mastery of life, of self, of feeling, of conditions, of tendencies, that will always enable us to be equal to any conditions that may arise, and that will enable us to state positively that none of these things move me. In brief, we will be above them all, and stronger than them all, because we have permitted the life and the power of the spiritual side to come forth in greater and greater measure. Herewith a question of vast importance will arise, and it refers to the idea of whether or not it is desirable to live wholly upon the spiritual side. There is a belief current that we may weaken the personal side if we live too much in the spiritual, but nothing could be farther from the truth. We know that when we are functioning on the spiritual side, we are constantly placing in action more and more of those higher spiritual forces that we become conscious of upon the spiritual side. And in consequence, we give expression to more life than we ever realized before. The result will be that both the life and the power of the personality will increase remarkably, and we shall have more strength, vitality, and energy, both in mind and in body, than we ever had before. Realizing this truth, we know that if we wish to meet a personality that is thoroughly filled with life, we must always look for a personality with soul. And a personality with soul is a personality where the soul has begun to express itself to a much larger degree than usual. But when we meet a personality without soul, we find the reverse condition. True, the soul is there, but it is not expressed, and the greater powers are there, but they are not expressed, simply remaining in passivity. So therefore the reverse of the above belief in the truth, and in consequence, the more attention we give to the spiritual side, the stronger and more powerful we become, not only in soul but also in mind and body. There is, however, truth in the belief that certain people sometimes appear to become physically weak when they begin to give marked attention to the spiritual side. But we shall find that those people are in reality not giving attention to the spiritual side. When we analyze their minds, we will find that they have not come in contact with real spiritual power, but have simply been dreaming of the mystical, and such states of mind are not conducive to physical, mental, or spiritual power. When you become conscious of the soul, you come in contact with powerful forces, and you will have to take control of them all and hold them in your possession if you wish to realize every gain that is made possible through the consciousness of such forces. However, if you do not take hold of those forces and control them perfectly, nothing will be gained. This is the reason why a great many people who touch the spiritual at frequent intervals simply have a pleasing experience, but do not gain in spiritual power. Considering this subject further, we should remember the principle involved, that is, that the building up of life on the personal side and on the mental side, as well as on the spiritual side, can be carried forward only through the training of consciousness to make the spiritual side its chief place of functioning. And we may all ask what we should do first in order that this goal may be realized. To begin, we must study the spiritual side, just as thoroughly as we've been studying the physical side. And accordingly, we must begin at once to apply the scientific method to the spiritual side. In other words, we should take up the other side of science. We know that we cannot function on the spiritual side to any extent until we become thoroughly familiar with the life and nature of the soul. For the truth is, as long as the inner kingdom is vague, mysterious something, we cannot consciously function there. But when we begin to analyze and explore the great spiritual kingdom, and proceed to study all its elements and principles, trying to get hold more and more of the fundamental qualities involved, we shall find that consciousness will gradually transfer itself to the spiritual side. And as this is being done, we shall find that increased power and increased life will come forth into mind and personality. When this great change begins, we will find ourselves gaining a deeper and deeper understanding of the mysteries of the kingdom. We will become familiar with our own spiritual nature, and we may continue this process of higher and greater understanding of the upper side of existence for any length of time. Then we shall find that whenever we take another step in that direction, thus increasing the power of consciousness to function spiritually, the soul will express itself, both in mind and in body, in added measure to correspond. Returning to the original idea, when the soul is fully and completely expressed in the personality, the physical or visible side of life will be filled with the light and the power of the Spirit. And the more perfectly we understand this truth, the more fully we realize that physical weakness, as well as weakness of character of mind, will naturally disappear as we advance into the expression of the soul through the life of the personality. And we shall also find the tendency of the human mind to drift with the stream, or to go under, when in the midst of adversity is due entirely to the fact that consciousness functions too much on the outside, thereby being limited both in wisdom and in power. That is, the personality under those circumstances is not strong enough to overcome adversity, or to create its own condition and its own life. The great change begins, however, when we step over the border and proceed to direct consciousness to functions more and more upon the spiritual side. For the truth is, that the moment consciousness begins to function in that higher realm, the coming forth of the spiritual elements and power will begin in no uncertain manner. Accordingly, from that time on, there will be a steady increase in the power of the mind, character, physical existence, and the life force in general. The great influx from the soul will proceed, and the personality will be filled more and more with life and power from above. When we so live that this process may continue indefinitely, and that consciousness may secure positive hold on the higher side of life, the expression of the soul will become stronger and will be continuous under every circumstance. Then we will always live in the strong, masterful state. We will always realize the power of the Spirit living in us, and we will feel more and more that power surging through us, animating and inspiring every atom, fiber, and vein. Thus we shall be able to transcend all discord, all inharmony, all disease, all weakness, and in fact anything that does not belong to the true order of a perfect state of being. In order to further this study and train consciousness in this wonderful work, we shall find the scientific method indispensable, and even though we may not comprehend this method perfectly in the beginning, we shall find, if we apply the principle involved, that we shall succeed remarkably and upon an ever-increasing scale. However, even if we do not go any further than simply taking this one step, that is, training consciousness to live more and more upon the spiritual side, the gain will be nothing less than extraordinary. And here we should remember that consciousness invariably tends to enter into those realms that we think of continually, or that we think of deeply and with persistent desire. Therefore, our purpose henceforth must be to give continuous thought to the spiritual side with a strong, persistent desire, to become more and more conscious of the spiritual life with all its elements, qualities, and powers. The gain will be unusual, and will appear in many forms, because the training of consciousness to enter into the spiritual realm will not only enable us to understand more perfectly the mysteries of the kingdom, but the experience will enrich the mind to a remarkable degree. In addition, this mode of living will add immensely to the joy of life. Indeed, we shall find upon the spiritual side an ever-increasing measure of that which is perfectly beautiful and sublimely ideal. Furthermore, we shall find in this mode of life the secret of the great life. In every generation and every time, men and women have appeared who were in possession of remarkable power, but they all did not seem to gain their power from the same source. Among them were many who depended upon the infinite alone, while others made no secret of the fact that they were the instruments of invisible entities. And in many instances, the latter seemed to exercise just as great a power and just as high a power as the former. Much inquiry, therefore, has risen among all who are in search of higher spiritual power as to what course to pursue, whether to go directly to God for this power or go to mediators in the realm of the invisible. In all these things there is one infallible guide. By their fruits ye shall know them. But in searching for the fruits or the consequence, we must not examine isolated circumstances only. We must examine the whole life from beginning to end, and of one who has the power, and also examine the results of that power upon all that have come directly under its influence. When we pursue such a course, we shall find that all those who are in possession of remarkable power naturally array themselves into two separate and distinct groups. The one group depending absolutely upon the infinite for all spiritual power, and the other groups depending principally upon invisible orders, invisible helpers, or invisible entities of some kind. And as we pursue this course to its ultimate state or condition, we find that the one group follows unmistakably the right-handed path, leading directly into eternal light, while the other group follows the left-handed path, leading eventually into utter darkness. To all appearances, both groups may seem to be in the beginning on the same path, the path of true spiritual power, and they may all seem to be prompted by the highest and purest motives. But as the two groups advance farther and farther upon their respective pathway, a marked difference begins to arise between them, and this difference becomes greater and greater until it finally becomes an impassable gulf. At first sight, there may seem to be nothing wrong in receiving higher power directly from invisible entities, and there may be certain temporary periods or conditions when such a course may be permissible. But no soul can continue very long to receive or borrow spiritual power from other souls in the invisible without drifting directly into the left-handed path. And the very moment anyone finds himself upon the left-handed path, the temptation and the inclination to use higher power for unholy ends becomes stronger and stronger until the conscious self gives in almost continually. Besides this, a marked weakening of character and principle begins almost at once the soul drifts into this path, and finally the desire to resist the temptation to misuse such power almost entirely disappears. The principal reason why it is wrong to seek spiritual powers from groups or orders or invisible entities, and why such a course leads directly and inevitably into the left-handed path, will be clearly understood when we realize what it truly means to grow and advance in spiritual things. Then we shall be fully convinced of the great truth that there is only one way to the light and the power of the Spirit, and that one way may be defined briefly in the flaming words of the prophet, "Return ye unto God." We advance spiritually by becoming more and more conscious of our oneness with the infinite, and all true spiritual growth depends directly upon this realization of higher and higher degrees of this very consciousness. But when we proceed to depend upon invisible entities for higher power, we turn our attention away from the realization of oneness with God, and seek instead a more perfect union between ourselves and those invisible groups from which we expect to receive greater power. We turn away from the one source of power, and whenever we turn away from that source, we step out of the right-handed path into the left-handed path. We cannot depend upon God unless we depend upon Him absolutely. Our eye must be single, otherwise we cannot see the light. We must follow the Supreme in all things, or we cannot follow Him truly in anything. We must turn either to the right or to the left. There is no intermediary path. If we turn to the left, we turn away from God. But we cannot turn to the right unless we are prepared to depend upon God absolutely for all spiritual wisdom, for all spiritual power, and for all the gifts that pertain to the spiritual life. The way is simple, and the inner truth is so clear that all can understand. Know that you are one with God, and you are on the way. Realize that God is closer than breathing, nearer than hands and feet, and the dawn of spiritual consciousness will have begun in your own life. And as you grow in that consciousness, you will find yourself gaining possession in greater and greater measure of higher spiritual power. Your spiritual vision will open more and more to the great eternal light, and you will know in your own soul that you have found the way, the truth, and the life. When we pursue this wonderful study, we shall meet many minds that will reason in this fashion. We know that we are receiving our power from invisible entities, but we are convinced that the power is pure, and we feel that our acceptance of this power will prepare us for the higher life and a greater work. In the meantime, we are doing a good work. We are helping many. We are thoroughly sincere, and our purpose, both in our life and in our work, is the very highest conceivable. In reply, however, to this mode of reasoning, plausible as it may seem, we must consider the truth as it is for all time, and not judge merely from a certain amount of good work that may be carried on in the present. We cannot judge from motives or intentions either, and judge wisely, for we all know that any one can have good motives, any one can be sincere. But in the midst of insincerity he may be mistaken. He may be good and kind today, and still he may gradually be drifting in the wrong direction. The truth is this, that if you wish to be helpful to the world, you need not go to invisible entities for your power. You can gain greater power and higher power by going directly to God. You have no excuses, therefore, in that respect for attaching yourself to invisible groups or orders, the true existence of which has been, and always will be, very doubtful. For here we must remember that invisible entities who really know God will never undertake to lend spiritual power to man. Enlightened entities in higher realms will forever seek to inspire man to go direct to God for all spiritual power, for they well know that any other course will inevitably lead into ages of distress and darkness. When we consider this phase of the subject, we realize in a most positive manner that we cannot borrow spiritual power from enlightened entities in higher realms, and we would not want to receive power from those who are not enlightened. We can, however, receive remarkable power from invisible entities under circumstances favorable to the end, but such entities do not know God. They do not know the way, the truth, and the life. If they did know, they would not lead man away from God by encouraging to accept power from them instead of from the Supreme. They are therefore spirits of darkness, and they themselves are already on the left-handed path. But even the power of darkness can perform miracles at times and do good works for a season. Therefore, we must not be misled by signs, wonder works, or remarkable appearances. We must first inquire the source of their power. Then we shall know whether or not they are on the path that leads to eternal light. Your work may at present be good, and your intentions may be good. But if you are not receiving your power directly from the infinite, you are gradually and surely drifting away from the true source of light, power, and truth. And before you may be aware of it, you will find yourself on the left-handed path. In truth, you may continue for years on this downward path without knowing where you are drifting, for the way to darkness does not always reveal its true nature to the human soul, or warn anyone from going further. Such warnings must come from the way of light, but there is a simple secret that will always inform us, truthfully, where we are. Ask yourself from whence you receive your power. If you know that you are receiving your power from the Supreme, and if you are trying to so live that you may realize more and more perfectly your oneness with the infinite, then you are on the path of light. But if you must admit to yourself that you are depending principally upon other sources, both for powers and guidance, then heed instantly those inspiring words of the prophet, "Return ye unto God." The first and greatest principle in all spiritual advancement or attainment is this: enter more and more perfectly into the conscious realization of your oneness with God. This is the way, this is the truth, this is the life. The whole of human existence, therefore, must be so constructed that every thought and act will tend directly to increase and deepen this conscious realization. Our one greatest purpose must be to know absolutely that we are eternally in the Spirit of God and forever one with God, and everything in life that may in any way interfere with that constant advancement of that purpose must be eliminated completely. Herein we find the full meaning of the great commandment, that we should seek no other gods but the one only supreme God. The power we may gain from lesser lights in the invisible world is but temporary, and their guidance leads inevitably away from the light and truth. They alone are on the true spiritual path who depend absolutely upon the Supreme. They alone are worthy to lead mankind who follow implicitly the guidance of the pure, white light of the One Spirit. End of chapter.